The greatest cruelty often wears the mask of indifference. To ignore is not a passive act, it is a weapon honed with precision, a statement that reverberates louder than confrontation. In a world addicted to validation, to withdraw your attention is to assert dominion over perception itself. Silence is a language few understand, yet those who master it dictate the tempo of desire, expectation, and fear. When you ignore, you create absence, the most strategic void a mind can ever endure. It is in this emptiness that power speaks. Observe the human mind. It clings desperately to acknowledgement, to recognition, to the smallest signal that its existence has been noted. Deny it, and you enter the realm of psychological tyranny without firing a shot. Ignoring is not mere avoidance, it is a calculated manipulation of attention, an architecture of absence designed to fracture ego and command compliance. Every glance withheld, every message unanswered, every act of deliberate invisibility is a stroke of psychological warfare. Those who pursue you, those who crave you, suddenly find themselves trapped in a labyrinth of expectation and obsession. Their value is no longer determined by the world, they are haunted by your inattention. Power exists not in engagement, but in the orchestration of absence. To engage indiscriminately is to dilute influence. To respond to every provocation is to surrender authority. The human ego is fragile, a brittle construct balanced precariously on attention and validation. Ignoring is the scalpel that dissects this fragility. In its operation, the mind becomes a battlefield where desire, insecurity, and uncertainty are weapons against themselves. You need not strike directly, their own psyche will do your work. Consider the subtlety required. Ignoring is not an emotional withdrawal born of weakness, it is a deliberate strategy rooted in understanding human nature. It requires restraint, observation, and the patience to allow the other to unravel under their own compulsions. There is an artistry here, a rhythm, a tempo to orchestrating absence. React too soon, and the spell is broken. React too late, and your authority becomes unpredictable, diluted. Perfect execution commands fear disguised as longing. People begin to measure themselves not against what you say, but against the silence you maintain. Silence, when wielded as a weapon, is heavier than words. In this strategy, timing is everything. Absence must be calibrated with precision, a psychological gradient rather than a blunt force. Too much withdrawal, and they may dismiss you. Too little, and you forfeit dominance. The mind is an adaptive machine, and yet even it succumbs to consistent patterns of inattention. When used wisely, ignoring transforms the familiar into the unknowable. You cease to exist in the manner they expect. Your value escalates as your presence recedes. Every interaction they anticipate, every acknowledgement they crave, becomes a tool of your design. The art of ignoring is the mastery of perception. You do not need to humiliate or confront, you simply allow absence to speak louder than the most eloquent insult. Your power is hidden, yet omnipresent. It operates not in the visible world, but within the minds of those who seek your attention. Obsession, anxiety, doubt, these are the collateral effects of your silent dominance. And in this domain, you are not merely unbothered, you are untouchable. By the end of this exploration, the psychological architecture of ignoring will be dissected in layers, stages of obsession, self-doubt, and silent capitulation. Each stage is a mirror, reflecting the fragility of desire, the instability of ego, and the invisible chains forged by absence. The untrained mind will perceive these outcomes as happenstance, as accident, but they are the result of calculated restraint, disciplined control, and the ruthless application of silence. The journey ahead is not comfortable, nor is it forgiving. You will see how ignoring becomes not merely a tactic, but a philosophy, a method to command attention without surrendering your own. In the world of power, engagement is currency, but absence is wealth. To ignore is to cultivate scarcity, to assert control over perception itself, to make desire a weapon against those who wield it foolishly. This is not cruelty in the mundane sense, it is mastery. And mastery, like silence, is absolute. The moment they realize you are indifferent, the mind begins to fracture. Obsession does not arrive as a sudden storm, it seeps in quietly, unnoticed until it has claimed dominion. Every unanswered message, every glance you withhold, becomes a mirror in which they measure their own inadequacy. Ignoring is the catalyst, and the ego, the fragile scaffold of human identity begins to tremble under its weight. In this stage, perception becomes distorted. What was once insignificant grows monumental. A delay, a silence, a pause, each now carries a meaning far beyond its objective reality. The mind searches desperately for patterns, for signals, for justification. You are no longer a person in their life. You have become a riddle, an absence that demands explanation. And in seeking it, they give you power without realizing it. Here desire and fear merge. Fear of exclusion, fear of loss, fear of irrelevance. These emotions bind the psyche like invisible chains. Obsession manifests not in overt action but in thought, in mental loops of anticipation and regret. Each attempt to grasp what you have withheld only deepens the dependence on your silence. The more you withdraw, the more potent your influence becomes, unseen yet undeniable. The Machiavellian principle is simple: control the environment, and the mind will control itself. You do not act to provoke, you act to orchestrate absence with precision. Their internal turbulence is your creation, a reflection of your restraint. And restraint is always more terrifying than action because it implies omniscience, the ability to withhold power, not because you must, but because you choose to. In this fracture, the first cracks of ego collapse appear. Confidence erodes beneath the pressure of uncertainty. Rationality bends to expectation. The mind, unable to dominate your silence, begins to dominate itself. Every fleeting hope, every imagined insight, is a testament to the power of not responding. They are prisoners of their own psyche, and you hold the key. Once obsession takes root, regret follows swiftly, subtle yet inexorable. The mind begins to replay every interaction, every nuance, every misstep, magnifying them into symbols of loss. Ignoring is no longer a simple act. It becomes a mirror reflecting their own failures, a relentless audit of inadequacy. They grasp at what was once accessible, only to find it receding further with every attempt. The absence you cultivate becomes a punishment they cannot escape, a private torment tailored by your restraint. This stage thrives on contrast. Your silence is not neutral, it is a presence in itself, a weight that measures the void. The human psyche cannot endure being undervalued by those it desires to impress. They agonize over perceived slights, invent meanings where none exist, and recalibrate their sense of self around the scarcity you enforce. Regret becomes a tool of domination, not through confrontation, but through the relentless pressure of being rendered irrelevant. The Machiavellian mind understands that regret is more destructive than anger, more binding than loyalty. Anger fades, resentment can be appeased, but regret gnaws at the marrow of identity, forcing self-reflection that inevitably leads to subordination. By doing nothing, you manipulate the internal economy of their mind. Each longing thought, each self-recriminating calculation reinforces your dominance. They begin to measure their worth not by what they possess, but by what your silence denies them. Here, the ego starts to collapse under its own illusions of control. The mind struggles to maintain equilibrium, yet every analysis reinforces the same painful truth: your absence is intentional, deliberate, and beyond their influence. Desire twists into self-judgment. They are trapped in a feedback loop, oscillating between hope and despair, compelled by the very void you engineered. In this stage, power is absolute precisely because it is invisible. You wield no weapons, offer no threats, yet your influence pervades every thought, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. They are captive to their own psyche, architects of their own suffering, while you remain untouched, observing the collapse with the quiet authority of one who understands that control lies not in action, but in deliberate restraint. Obsession and regret are dangerous, but fear is the forge in which true submission is shaped. As silence stretches, the mind begins to tremble beneath the uncertainty you have cultivated. They no longer question your absence, they fear it. Fear of losing relevance, fear of irretrievable loss, fear of exposure in their own vulnerability. In ignoring, you have weaponized uncertainty itself, turning it into a crucible where identity begins to fracture. At this stage, self-perception collapses. They no longer measure themselves by external standards, they measure themselves against the unreachable benchmark of your attention. The psyche, starved of validation, fractures into competing selves, hopeful, desperate, ashamed, resentful. each vying for recognition that will not come. Your absence dictates the architecture of their internal chaos, an invisible hand bending their mind toward dependence on what you withhold. Machiavellian strategy thrives here. Direct confrontation is unnecessary. Conflict is a blunt instrument. True control is quiet, imperceptible, and absolute. The fear you cultivate is subtle yet omnipresent, like a shadow always at the edge of perception. It forces recalibration every thought, every desire. Every impulse is weighed against the silent authority you maintain. They are prisoners of a reality you define without uttering a word. In this fractured state, the ego splinters, confidence erodes, certainty dissolves, and the mind becomes malleable to the architecture of absence. They are no longer whole, they are shadows of desire and doubt, perpetually oscillating between imagined understanding and crushing uncertainty. Every attempt to regain footing only deepens the fracture, reinforcing the dominance you exercise with cold detachment. Fear is the final sculptor of obedience before realization. When harnessed through the deliberate act of ignoring, it dismantles self-assurance without violence, coercion, or spectacle. It is a quiet tyranny, one that leaves no scars on the exterior yet reshapes the interior entirely. And in this void, you are sovereign. They are forced to navigate the labyrinth of their own mind, each misstep reinforcing your unspoken power. By now, your absence is no longer merely a void. It has become a presence, a force that dictates thought and desire. They do not just notice your silence, they live within it, surrendering their attention to the emptiness you orchestrate. Obsession has matured into an internalized dominance, a psychological addiction to the subtle power you wield without effort. Every fleeting hope, every imagined signal, reinforces the authority of your restraint. They are ensnared not by chains, but by the architecture of absence itself. In this stage, the mind bends itself around your control. Regret has hardened into vigilance, fear has become a constant companion. Yet there is no outward sign of submission, only the invisible restructuring of cognition. Every calculation, every replayed conversation, every self-questioning thought is dominated by one inescapable truth: they are powerless in the face of deliberate indifference. You have not acted, you have merely withheld, yet that withholding commands more obedience than any threat could. Machiavellian strategy thrives in this quiet mastery. Dominance is most complete when it operates unnoticed, when the subject becomes the instrument of their own subjugation. They chase, they calculate, they anticipate, not because you demand it, but because their mind has made your silence the axis around which reality spins. Your restraint is a mirror reflecting their inadequacy back to them, magnifying flaws and intensifying dependency. Here obsession ceases to be external. It is internalized, self-sustaining and relentless. Every thought they devote to you cements your supremacy. Identity, once solid, now exists in reference to your absence. Every action they consider, every decision they make, is filtered through the silent standard you set. They no longer exist independently, they exist in the orbit of your control. In this stage, the architecture of ignoring is complete. Power has moved from the world into the mind. Obsession is no longer fleeting, it is enduring. Fear is no longer reactive, it is structural. And you, in quiet detachment, remain untouchable, an invisible sovereign whose dominion is felt most acutely not through confrontation, but through the relentless gravity of absence. As absence extends, the final layers of the mind begin to crack. The subtle tension of obsession, regret, and fear now coalesces into a full-blown psychological collapse. They are no longer merely attentive to your silence, they are enslaved by it. Every thought circles back to you. Every plan, every hope, every imagined opportunity is measured against the void you maintain. Control has become internalized, but now it is volatile, fragile, and desperate. At this stage, the ego fractures completely. Identity splinters under the relentless weight of uncertainty. Rationality is replaced by compulsion. They search for answers where none exist, analyzing every omission, every delay, every nuance, seeking patterns in randomness. The mind, starved of acknowledgement, begins to betray itself, creating illusions and false narratives, blaming itself for a dominance it cannot comprehend. You do not intervene. You remain silent, and silence is now their jailer. Desperation emerges as an almost physical sensation. Thoughts become intrusive, repetitive, unrelenting. The mind is exhausted, yet incapable of rest. They experience the terror of impotence, the realization that desire alone cannot bend your will. In this state, every imagined victory, every hope for reciprocation, intensifies the chains of their own psyche. They are trapped, not by your hand, but by the invisible architecture you constructed through deliberate inattention. Machiavellian precision thrives here. The collapse is complete because it is self-administered. No words, no threats, no confrontation are needed. Your power is absolute because it resides within their mind, operating without effort. You have created a psychological environment in which they are compelled to obey, to yearn, to fracture, all while believing they might still influence the outcome. It is a tyranny far more enduring than violence. It is dominance crystallized as internalized obsession. In this stage, control is final and influence is total. The individual becomes a prisoner of their own perception, a slave to absence, a testament to the power of deliberate indifference. You have moved beyond mere manipulation. You have engineered psychological inevitability. They are undone by their own mind, and you remain the architect, untouched, invisible, and sovereign. At the end of this deliberate architecture of silence, a terrifying truth emerges: human desire is far more malleable than morality, and far more fragile than strength. The mind, once confident and anchored, is now a landscape of shadows and echoes, dominated not by force but by absence. To ignore is not cruelty, it is revelation. You show, without words, the emptiness that lies at the core of dependence, the fragility of expectation, and the subtle tyranny of unearned authority. Those who sought your attention now orbit your absence like a moon trapped by a planet's gravity, unaware that their own thoughts are chains. Obsession, regret, fear, and desperation. The stages of collapse serve as mirrors of a singular reality. Control is internal, and the mind that craves validation will always be subject to the one who withholds it. Power does not reside in engagement or confrontation. It resides in the ability to shape thought without interference, to command attention without action, to rule the psyche with silence. Yet the lesson extends beyond domination of others. The ultimate mastery lies in understanding this force within oneself. To cultivate internal authority is to exist beyond the compulsions of recognition, beyond the manipulations of desire, beyond the illusions of dependence. Silence, indifference, and deliberate absence are not tools merely for conquest, they are instruments of sovereignty. When you learn to wield them, you are no longer prey to the obsessions of others. You are sovereign over your own mind. This is the cruel elegance of the art of ignoring. It reveals the vulnerability of those who seek validation, while simultaneously forging an unassailable self. To observe without entangling, to withhold without hesitation, to remain untouched while the world frays, is the quiet apex of power. No applause is needed, no acknowledgement desired. Authority, in its truest form, requires no validation. And so, the final truth settles like a shadow over consciousness. Those who understand the value of absence rule, not because they act, but because they do not. The mind that is unmoved by the hunger of others is untouchable. The self that is sovereign over desire is inviolable. Power in its purest form is the mastery of silence, the governance of perception, and the relentless assertion of internal authority. In the void left by your indifference, the world discovers its own dependence, and you remain absolute.